السلام علیکم. آج سافٹ ویئر ریکوائرمنٹس انجینئرنگ کا 10واں لیکچر ہے، اور اگر آپ کو یاد ہو تو ہم ریکوائرمنٹس ایلیسیٹیشن کے اوپر ڈسکشن کر رہے تھے، اور ایک لیکچر ہم نے پورا اس کے اوپر اسٹڈی کیا تھا. وہیں سے آج بات لے کر چلیں گے، اور آج کا لیکچر بھی ریکوائرمنٹس ایلیسیٹیشن کے اوپر ہی فوکس کرے گا. لیکن اس سے پہلے کہ ہم یہ ڈسکس کریں کہ ہم نے پچھلے لیکچر میں کیا پڑھا تھا اور ہم آج کن ٹاپکس کو ٹچ کریں گے، میں آپ کو ایک چارٹ دکھانا چاہتا ہوں جو کہ ریکوائرمنٹس انجینئرنگ کا پروسیس ہے. یہ چارٹ آپ پہلے بھی دیکھ چکے ہیں، اور یہ صرف اس لیے آپ کو دکھا رہا ہوں کہ آپ کے ذہن میں آ جائے کہ ہم ریکوائرمنٹس انجینئرنگ کے پروسیس میں اس وقت کہاں پر فوکس کر رہے ہیں. تو جیسا کہ آپ دیکھ رہے ہیں کہ ایک بولڈ ایرو پوائنٹ کر رہا ہے ریکوائرمنٹس ایلیسیٹیشن کی ایکٹیویٹی کی طرف، اور اسی جگہ پر ہم اس وقت ہیں. ایک میں نے پچھلے لیکچر میں بتایا تھا کہ ہم 3 لیکچرز اس کے اوپر فوکس رکھیں گے، اور ایک اس میں سے ہو چکا ہے، اور آج دوسرا ہے، اور اس کے بعد پھر ایک اور ہوگا. تو گزشتہ لیکچر میں جو چیزیں ہم نے پڑھی تھیں، اگر ان کا ریکیپ کر لیا جائے تو ہم نے کانسیپٹ ایلیسیٹیشن کا پڑھا تھا کہ ایلیسیٹیشن کیا ہوتی ہے، ایلیسیٹیشن سے کیا مراد ہے، اور ایلیسیٹیشن کے پروسیس کو ہم نے انٹروڈیوس کیا تھا. اور نالج ایکوزیشن کی جو بیسکس ہیں ان کے بارے میں تھوڑی سی بات ہوئی تھی کہ وہ کیا ہیں. ان کو میں آپ کے سامنے دہرائی کے لیے ریپیٹ کرتا ہوں کہ دیر آر 4 بیسکس آف نالج ایکوزیشن. دے آر ریڈنگ، لسننگ، آسکنگ اینڈ آبزرونگ. انہی 4 طریق سے ہم کسی بھی قسم کی نالج کو یا کسی بھی قسم کے علم کو حاصل کرتے ہیں. اسی طرح نالج ایکوزیشن کی بعض ٹیکنیکس ہیں، ہم نے ان کے بارے میں صرف جانا تھا. اب ہم تفصیل سے اس کے اوپر بات کریں گے. نالج ایکوزیشن کی جن ٹیکنیکس کے بارے میں ہم نے ڈسکس کیا تھا وہ کیا ہیں، وہ انڈیویجول ٹیکنیکس ہیں، گروپ ٹیکنیکس ہیں، ماڈلنگ ٹیکنیکس ہیں، اور کوگنیٹو ٹیکنیکس ہیں. تو میرا مشورہ آپ کو یہ ہے کہ آپ اپنا پچھلا لیکچر بھی ریکوائرمنٹس ایلیسیٹیشن کا اسے گو تھرو کریں، تاکہ آپ کو وہ ذہن میں رہے، اور آج جو ہم باتیں سیکھیں گے ان کے ساتھ ملا کر اس کو جب آپ کریں گے تو ایک فاؤنڈیشن کے اوپر آپ کا علم مزید بڑھے گا. اسی طرح ہم نے ایلیسیٹیشن کی کچھ پرابلمس بھی ڈسکس کی تھیں، جن میں اسکوپ ہے، انڈرسٹینڈیبلٹی ہے، اور والیٹیلیٹی ہے. اور یہ سمرائز کرنے کے لیے کہ اکثر یہ پرابلم آتی ہے کہ پرابلم کو ہم صحیح طرح اسکوپ نہیں کر سکتے، ہمیں پتہ نہیں ہوتا کہ کون سے حصے کو ہم نے شامل کرنا ہے اور کون سے حصے کو ہم نے شامل نہیں کرنا. اسی طرح جو لیول آف انڈرسٹینڈنگ ہے وہ مختلف ہوتا ہے مختلف اسٹیک ہولڈرز کا، اور یہ کہ ریکوائرمنٹس چینج ہوتی رہتی ہیں. بعض تو اس وجہ سے چینج ہوتی ہیں کہ ان میں کوئی غلطی ہوتی ہے، اور بعض ریکوائرمنٹس اس وجہ سے چینج ہوتی ہیں کہ کسٹمر کو اپنی ضرورت کا آہستہ آہستہ احساس ہوتا ہے، اور ریکوائرمنٹس انجینئرز ان کو اس پروسیس میں ہیلپ کرتے ہیں. اور پھر اس وجہ سے بھی ریکوائرمنٹس چینج ہوتی رہتی ہیں کہ بزنس نیڈز چینج ہوتی ہیں، اور ظاہر بات ہے کہ اگر بزنس نیڈز چینج ہوں گی تو ریکوائرمنٹس تو چینج ہوں گی، اور اگر یہ نہیں چینج ہوں گی تو جو ہمارا سافٹ ویئر سلوشن ہے وہ بزنس پرابلم کا صحیح حل نہیں دے سکے گا. تو چینج سے یا ریکوائرمنٹس کی والیٹیلیٹی سے گھبرانا نہیں چاہیے، اس کو مینیج کرنا چاہیے، اس کو اس طرح کنٹرول کرنا چاہیے کہ یہ ڈیولپمنٹ پروسیس کے لیے مشکل نہ پیدا کرے، بلکہ اس کو اس طرح ہم فیسیلیٹیٹ کریں، اس طرح مینیج کریں کہ چینج in requirements helps us in developing a product which meets the real needs of the customers. تو یہ ہم چینج کو ایبسولوٹ کنٹرول کے ساتھ لمٹ نہیں کر سکتے، ہم اس کو مینیج کر سکتے ہیں، اور ہمیں مینیج کرنا آنا چاہیے، اور اس کے اوپر ہم ڈیٹیل سے سیمسٹر میں بات کرتے رہیں گے. اور مینجمنٹ آف ریکوائرمنٹس کے اوپر ایک علیحدہ سے لیکچر بھی ہے. اس طرح ہم نے ایک اور پیراڈائم انٹروڈیوس کیا تھا کہ ریکوائرمنٹس ایلیسیٹیشن کا ایک کانٹیکسٹ ہے. اور اس کانٹیکسٹ میں جو چیزیں شامل ہیں وہ کیا ہیں، ان کو ہم دیکھتے ہیں کہ وہ ایک آرگنائزیشن کا ایک رول ہے ریکوائرمنٹ سلیسیٹیشن میں، کیونکہ آرگنائزیشنز جو ہیں وہ پروڈیوسرز آف ڈیٹا ہیں اینڈ دے آر آلسو کنزیومرز آف انفارمیشن. اسی طرح جو انوائرمنٹ ہے اس میں ٹیکنیکل انوائرمنٹ بھی شامل ہے اور بعض اور انوائرمنٹس کے جو اسپیکٹس ہیں وہ بھی شامل ہیں، ریگولیٹری کنسٹرینٹس ہیں وہ بھی شامل ہیں. پھر پروجیکٹ کے اپنے کنسٹرینٹس ہوتے ہیں، اس کے بجٹ ہوتا ہے، اس کا اسکیجول ہوتا ہے، اور کمپیٹیٹر کے ساتھ جو اسپیکٹس ہیں وہ بھی پروجیکٹ کے اندر انکلوڈ ہوتے ہیں. اور جو کنسٹرینٹس مختلف اسٹیک ہولڈرس کی طرف سے امپوز کیے جاتے ہیں وہ بھی کانٹیکسٹ کا حصہ ہوتے ہیں. تو کانٹیکسٹ itself is a very important part of requirement solicitation process. اور اس میں چار چیزیں ہم نے ڈسکرائب کی تھیں، اور جیسا کہ میں نے ریکمینڈ کیا ہے کہ آپ پچھلا لیکچر ایک دفعہ پھر ریویو کریں تاکہ آپ کے ذہن میں آئے کہ یہ چیزیں کیا ہیں. ہمارے پاس اب وقت نہیں ہے اس کو پوری تفصیل کے ساتھ دوبارہ ڈسکس کرنے کا. تو یہ چاروں چیزیں بہت اہم ہیں الیسیٹیشن پروسیس کے اندر. اس کے بعد ہم نے کچھ گائیڈ لائنس ڈسکس کی تھیں نالج ایکوزیشن کی، اور ان گائیڈ لائنس کے بیسس کے اوپر ہم یہ ڈٹرمن کر سکتے ہیں کہ جو نالج ہم نے گین کی ہے، جو ایکوائر کی ہے، اس کو حاصل کرنے کا جو طریق ہے وہ ہمارا صحیح ہونا چاہیے. اور اگر وہ طریق ہمارا صحیح نہیں ہے تو لازماً جو ایکوائرڈ نالج ہے یا ڈسکورڈ ریکوائرمنٹس ہیں ان کے اندر بھی کوئی نہ کوئی پرابلم لازماً آتی رہے گی. اب آپ پکچر ایک دیکھ رہے ہیں جس کا ٹائٹل ہے کمپوننٹس آف ریکوائرمنٹ سلیسیٹیشن. اس میں ریکوائرمنٹ سلیسیٹیشن کے 4 کمپوننٹس دکھائے گئے ہیں، اور اگر میں آپ کے سامنے پڑھوں کہ یہ کیا ہیں تو نمبر 1 اپلیکیشن ڈومین ہے، نمبر 2 پرابلم ٹو بی سالوڈ ہے، یعنی کہ جو پرابلم آپ اس اپلیکیشن ڈومین میں ہے جس کو آپ نے حل کرنا ہے وہ ہے. پھر کانٹیکسٹ ہے، بزنس کانٹیکسٹ ہے، اور آخر میں اسٹیک ہولڈر نیڈس اینڈ کنسٹرینٹس ہے. اور آپ یہ بھی دیکھ رہے ہیں کہ اس سرکل کے اوپر ایک ایرو لگا ہوا ہے جو آپ کو بتا رہا ہے کہ ڈائریکشن کیا ہے ان کمپوننٹس کی. ظاہر ہے کہ کمپوننٹس کی ڈائریکشن نہیں ہے، یہ ڈائریکشن ہے فرام دی بریڈتھ ٹو دا ڈیٹیلس. اب اپلیکیشن ڈومین جو ہے وہ کوئی بھی اپلیکیشن ڈومین ہے وہ ایک براڈ اسپیکٹرم رکھتا ہے اپنے اندر، اور اس براڈ اسپیکٹرم کے اندر آپ نے ایک پرابلم کو سالو کرنا ہے. اور اس پرابلم کے ساتھ جب آپ بزنس کانٹیکسٹ کو اٹیچ کرتے ہیں تو وہ پھر مزید نیرو انٹرفیس اس کا ہو جاتا ہے، اور پھر وہاں پر اسٹیک ہولڈرس کی جو ریکوائرمنٹس ہیں، جو نیڈس ہیں، اور جو کنسٹرینٹس اسٹیک ہولڈرس آپ کے اوپر امپوز کرتے ہیں اس کی ڈسکوری ہے. تو اس ڈائیگرام کو جو ابھی آپ دیکھ رہے ہیں اچھی طرح سمجھنے کی کوشش کریں کہ جب بھی ریکوائرمنٹ سلیسیٹیشن کا پروسیس ایکسیکیوٹ ہوگا تو اس کی ایکسیکیوشن کے لیے ضروری ہے کہ وہ ان چاروں کمپوننٹس کو انکیمپس کرے، اور اٹ شوڈ اسٹارٹ ود اپلیکیشن ڈومین اینڈ اٹ اینڈز ود اسٹیک ہولڈر نیڈس اینڈ کنسٹرینٹس. یہ نہیں کہ آپ ریکوائرمنٹس یا اسٹیک ہولڈر نیڈس کو سب سے پہلے ڈٹرمن کرنا شروع کریں اور اس کے بعد اپلیکیشن ڈومین کی انفارمیشن حاصل کریں. دس از ناٹ دا کریکٹ آرڈر. تو گزشتہ لیکچرز میں بھی یہ بات کئی دفعہ میں نے ایمفسائز کی ہے کہ اگر آپ نے ریکوائرمنٹس انجینئرنگ کے پرسپیکٹو سے ایک اچھی ریکوائرمنٹس ماڈل بنانا ہے تو جس اپلیکیشن ڈومین میں آپ کام کر رہے ہیں اس کو آپ کو اچھی طرح اسٹڈی کرنا پڑے گا، اور کسی حد تک اپلیکیشن ڈومین کے اندر آپ کو اپنی ایک نالج بیس بنانی پڑے گی. اس کے بغیر جو بھی آپ ریکوائرمنٹس اکٹھی کریں گے یا ریکوائرمنٹس ماڈل ڈیولپ کریں گے اس میں تشنگی رہے گی، اور آپ کا اپنا علم بھی جو ہے وہ صحیح نہیں ہوگا یا مکمل نہیں ہوگا. اور یہ آپ کہہ سکتے ہیں کہ ہم نے ریکوائرمنٹس تو گیدر کر لی ہیں لیکن آپ کمفرٹیبل نہیں ہوں گے اس اپلیکیشن ڈومین میں کام کرنے کے حوالے سے. یہ بھی میں ساتھ بتاتا چلوں کہ آپ ڈومین ایکسپرٹ بھی نہیں بن سکتے، کیونکہ آپ بنیادی طور پہ کمپیوٹر پروفیشنل ہیں، سافٹ ویئر انجینئر ہیں، یا ایک اسپیشلائزڈ رول سافٹ ویئر انجینئرنگ کے اندر آپ کے پاس ریکوائرمنٹس انجینئر کا ہے. तो ये भी आपके जहन में रहना चाहिए कि आप किसी डोमेन के एक्सपर्ट नहीं बन सकेंगे, लेकिन उस डोमेन के बारे में आपके पास सफिशेंट इंफॉर्मेशन होनी चाहिए। नेक्स्ट स्टेप के तौर पर आपने प्रॉब्लम को एनालाइज करना है, प्रॉब्लम को स्टडी करना है, उसको समझना है कि वो प्रॉब्लम क्या है और किस बिजनेस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में वो प्रॉब्लम उभरी है या किस बिजनेस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में उसका एक सलूशन दरकार है। इन तीनों चीज़ों को स्टडी करने के बाद ही आप सही मानों में, जिनको हम कोट अनकोट रिक्वायरमेंट्स कहते हैं, वो डिटरमिन कर सकेंगे। ऑल्दो बहुत सारी रिक्वायरमेंट्स जो हैं वो एप्लीकेशन डोमेन से आ रही होती हैं, बहुत सारी बिजनेस कॉन्टेक्स्ट से हमें मिल रही होती हैं, और जो आखिरी क्वाड्रेंट है इस सर्कल का वो स्टेक होल्डर नीड्स एंड कंस्ट्रेंट्स है, और मोस्टली आप वहाँ पर कंसंट्रेट करेंगे और जो आपका कस्टमर के साथ रिलेशनशिप होगा वो इस क्वाड्रेंट में डेवलप होगा, जैसा कि अभी हम आइंदा भी देखते चले जाएंगे। अब अपनी स्क्रीन के ऊपर आप 4 मुख्तलिफ टॉपिक्स लिखे हुए देख रहे हैं, जिनकी थोड़ी सी हमने डिस्कशन अभी की थी, और इस चार्ट का हेडिंग भी यही है कि डायमेंशंस टू रिक्वायरमेंट सॉलिसिटेशन। तो पहली डायमेंशन एप्लीकेशन डोमेन अंडरस्टैंडिंग की है। अब आप इसको कंपेयर करें अगर पिछले डायग्राम से, उसमें आप देख रहे थे कि एप्लीकेशन डोमेन एक कंपोनेंट के तौर पर आपके सामने प्रेजेंट किया गया था। अब जो डायमेंशन है वो ये है कि आपने एप्लीकेशन डोमेन को समझना है, और यही मैं पिछले चार्ट के डिस्कशन में भी आपको बता रहा था। द सेकंड point is that you have to understand the problem as thoroughly as possible. Obviously, it is not going to be easy that you understand the problem right away. If it's a complex problem, then obviously you would need to carefully read all the issues and all the documents that are associated with that problem. Third point is business understanding. And that is the context in which that problem occurs. And you have to fully understand that before you can really take care of the last thing or the last dimension, which is understanding the needs and constraints of system stakeholders. So the first 3 bullets will, or first 3 points will provide you with implicit knowledge or tacit knowledge, which is often not explicitly mentioned. And the last point, or the last very important category or dimension of requirement solicitation, will uncover the explicit needs and constraints imposed by the system stakeholders. And now we will take up each one of them and see what they are. The application domain understanding includes knowledge of the general area where the system is applied. If it is a financial application, then you have to understand financial sector. If it is industrial automation, then you have to fully understand what industrial automation is. If it is manufacturing of air conditioning units and that process has somehow been automated, then you have to understand how those units are put together. If it is a database or a personal information for employees of a hospital, then you have to understand that domain. And so the general area where the system is to be applied has to be understood by requirements engineers at a comfortable level. Now, this is a very vague statement. What is comfortable level? Comfortable level, if I can say, is that where a requirements engineer can comfortably use these the terminology and understand the discussion of domain experts, so that every time a new term comes along or a new acronym is used, he or she doesn't have to rush towards the glossary and say, okay, what does this mean? So a comfortable level of understanding must be achieved within that application domain. And obviously this is going to be difficult for the first time. Whenever one is working in a new domain, the first project is always difficult. But if it's a repeat type of project and you're working on the same domain again, then one is already comfortable with the domain information, and only the business context should be understood. in much more detail. The second dimension is problem understanding. The details of specific customer problem where the system will be applied must be understood. And again, this is not be achieved by a single reading of the problem statement or a statement of work. Every problem has multiple dimensions to it, and it is not possible to understand all these aspects in a single reading, and multiple readings of documents and discussions will certainly uncover the real problems. I also must tell you that sometimes a customer thinks or relates a problem which in fact is only part of the problem, or which is not a problem and it's only the perception of the customer that this is a problem, and only a minor solution or a sub-solution sort of thing can be implemented. But it may relate to a larger problem, and then it is the responsibility of the requirements engineers to inform and to a certain degree educate the customers about the real problems that they are facing. So problem understanding is another very important dimension of the requirements elicitation process, and there are many things that are uncovered by reading the documents and trying to understand what the problem really is. And the third dimension is business understanding. Business understanding is the understanding of how systems interact and contribute to overall business objectives and business goals of that organization. Now, every organization, whether it's for profit or not for profit, has certain objectives and goals. For profit organizations use the word business goals or business objectives, and the problem that we are solving has its role in achieving those goals, by meaning to say that the solution that will be provided by the current project will help in achieving the objectives of the company. Whenever we are solving a problem, it typically is raised by the fact that we are not able to achieve the business objectives in a satisfactory way. And so we need to either improve upon the productivity or to make the solution efficient so that the business goals and the business objectives of an organization are met in such a way that make it more profitable. And last dimension, and clearly the most important, is understanding the needs and constraints of system stakeholders. That is understanding in detail the specific needs of people who require system support in their work. And that system support is an automated software solution, or part thereof, an automated software solution. And this is typically most people think of as elicitation. But in fact, there are three more dimensions which I have described to you in some degree of detail. We will be concentrating on these, all four of these, but obviously we will concentrate more on the fourth dimension, which is understanding the needs and constraints of system stakeholders. And these are also the explicitly stated requirements of the software solution. Elicitation is a process, and this process, if you can remember the chart that I showed you earlier in the lecture, is that requirements elicitation is followed by the requirements analysis and negotiation activities. Requirements elicitation and requirements analysis are closely linked processes. Now, for teaching purposes, and to show that these processes have their individual importance, I would treat analysis and negotiation processes separately from requirements elicitation processes. But the fact of the matter is that they are very closely related with each other. A lot of analysis goes on during the elicitation process. For example, if a customer is asked a question and he or she then gives an answer which in somehow, some way contradicts with another stakeholder's response, then it is very natural that the requirements engineer is doing some sort of analysis in his or her head. Now, this is one informal example of intermixing or interleaving of requirements elicitation process and requirements analysis process. There can be other examples also. So the point that I want to emphasize here is that the requirements elicitation process and requirements analysis processes are interleaved, but for the purpose of clearly defining them and clearly understanding them, I have decided to show them separately and discuss them separately. Continuing on with our discussion, you are seeing on the screen that there are 4 stages of requirements elicitation. Number 1 is objective setting. Number 2 is background knowledge acquisition. Number 3 is knowledge organization. And number 4 is stakeholder requirements collection. Let me say that again. Objective setting, background knowledge acquisition, knowledge organization, and stakeholder requirements collection. Let's talk about each one of them in some detail. Let's consider objective setting as the first one. Overall organizational objectives should be established at this stage. This falls into the discussion that we had a few minutes earlier, that what are the objectives of the organization for development of this software system. The overall objectives must be fully understood by all parties, including the requirements engineers. The objectives include general goals of business, an outline description of the problem to be solved, and why the system may be necessary. Now, this is very important that everyone involved, all the stakeholders, all the top management on the customer side and the end users and also the development team fully understand why they are building a software system or why is it necessary, and the constraints on the system such as budget, schedule, and interoperability constraints. During this semester, I have emphasized many times the importance of interoperability, because in this era there are multiple operating systems, multiple languages, and there is a big requirement, an important requirement, that systems interoperate with each other. It is not possible for organizations to throw away their existing software systems, and so they require the new development to be such that it interoperates with existing software products. Another thing is that with the popularity of internet and other communication technologies, it has become possible to use data from other sources and from other locations and even from other companies that was not possible before. And so any new development of software product must consider interoperability as a very important part of their development philosophy. The second point that you see on your screen is background knowledge acquisition. Requirements engineers gather and understand background information in this stage. This includes information about the organization where the system is to be installed, information about the application domain of the system, and information about any existing systems which are in use and which may be replaced. As I had said just a couple of minutes ago, that it is not possible for companies to throw away their existing software systems. But in some cases, they want to introduce new technology, and their future plans dictate that they replace those components of their technology which do not fit into their technology policy, which do not give value for the money. And eventually, newer and better technology and those tools which provide better productivity will replace older tools. But this has to be done in such a way that the existing systems continue to operate and the new systems interoperate with them. Again, emphasizing the importance of interoperability. The third point that you see listed on the screen is knowledge organization. The large amount of knowledge which has been collected in previous stages must now be organized and collated and classified, and this is a very difficult task, and this is a very important task. For example, if you cannot find links to knowledge or information that you have collected, then that knowledge is practically useless. It's practically not of any use to you at a given time. So once knowledge has been acquired, requirements have been discovered, they must be organized and collated in such a way that it is accessible to the right people at the right time. This includes, that is, the knowledge organization identifying system stakeholders and their roles in the organization, prioritizing the goals of the organization, and discarding domain knowledge which does not contribute directly to the system requirements. Obviously, whenever one is studying a domain, one encounters a lot of information, and all that information is not applicable to the problem that is being discussed or that is being solved at the current time. And some of the domain information may not be applicable to the business context in which that problem is being solved. So knowledge organization not only means to categorize and classify those things which are needed, but also discarding those things which are not needed. Now, discarding just does not mean that you start throwing away things. If you have gathered useful information about an application domain which is not relevant in the particular scenario, in the particular business context, you should store it properly so that once you do other projects, that information may become relevant and you do not have to then study the application domain to acquire that knowledge again. So in other words, discarding does not mean that you literally destroy that information. This also means that stashing it away so that it can be used in future projects and it is not part of the current project's documents, so that the documents that are relevant for the current project remain at one point or in one area. And the last point that you see listed on the screen, which is stakeholder requirements collection, It involves consulting system stakeholders to discover their requirements and deriving requirements which come from application domain and the organization which is acquiring the system. So again, this relates to the fourth component of elicitation that we had talked about earlier in the lecture today. So you're seeing general requirements elicitation process on your screens. It consists of 4 stages, the stages that we have discussed in some detail a few minutes ago. Let's take a look at them and their relationship with each other. As you can see, the establish objectives stage has 3 sub-stages in it: business goals, problem to be solved, and system constraints. And the output produced by these sub-stages are then taken as input by the understand background stage, which is again consists of 3 sub-stages as organizational structure, application domain, and existing systems. Now, these are shown as very idealized processes, but in fact, they are intermixed with each other. These stages are interleaved with each other. When business goals are understood, the organizational structure becomes obvious, or it should become obvious to the requirements engineers. But still, they have to observe or read documents which provide the organizational structure of the company. So as you see, each sub-stages are linked with each other in a very organized way. This is to elaborate the relationship that exists between these 4 major stages of requirements elicitation. The third stage is organized knowledge, and it consists of stakeholder identification, goal prioritization, and domain knowledge filtering. Remember, we talked about discarding certain aspects of domain knowledge for that particular project which are not relevant in its case. And the last stage is collect requirements, which consists of stakeholder requirements collection, collection of domain requirements, and collection of organizational requirements which come from the study of the organizational structure and also from the system constraints. So these stages are shown here as very organized and idealized process, while the reality is that the requirements elicitation tends to be much more messier than it has been shown here. The activities are usually mixed up with each other, and whenever one is doing, for example, establishing objectives, some background knowledge is also gained and understood by just establishing the objectives. And while some background knowledge is acquired, the knowledge is organized as part of it. I mean, whenever you are gathering information about the organization structure, you are naturally going to organize that knowledge without having to create a separate stage for it. And that's the point that I wanted to make, is that a lot of these activities are interleaved and mixed up with each other. The purpose was to inform you and educate you that these individual categories and subcategories of requirements elicitation process must be performed so that none of them is left out, because we will see what kinds of problems occur if any one of these are not performed correctly. For example, if objective setting activities are not carried out, significant analysis problems can occur. These problems occur because no objective and business goals are available to prioritize requirements. And if you see on the chart that if no objective settings activities are performed, then you cannot correctly organize your knowledge, which is part of the prioritization. And we go another step into the requirements collection part. When no objectives are clearly defined or clearly understood and they are not organized properly, then when the requirements are gathered, one cannot really relate to them and one cannot perform the requirements analysis activities which follow the requirements elicitation process. Also, you can see at the bottom of the picture that there is these multiple arrows going from each stage into other stages, and this just shows that this process is highly iterative and it is not one way. Establishing objectives and understanding background and organizing knowledge and also collecting requirements are interactive and iterative processes. And if an error is discovered and there's a need to go back, one can easily go back to the previous stages and there is no hindrance in it. And so, continuing on with our comments on this process, the output produced from this process is a draft document which describes the system requirements. Now, these requirements can then be analyzed to discover problems and conflicts in the requirements definition. This requirements elicitation process is followed by requirements analysis process, which we will discuss in another lecture. So, just to understand this diagram again and to make a comment about it, this consists of 4 stages: objective setting, understanding background, organizing knowledge, and collecting requirements. These activities or these stages have sub-activities in each one of them, and these are intermixed with each other. They are not as idealized as you can see them on the charts, but they are shown here to give or show their importance. And as a result of these activities, we acquire large volumes of information. So, continuing, the large knowledge that we have acquired needs to be processed. We have applied the 4 knowledge acquisition basics, which is the reading, listening, asking, and observing, to collect customer requirements. These requirements contain wishes and needs of multiple stakeholders, which are then organized so that they can be checked for inconsistencies and incomplete information. We will discuss 3 knowledge structuring techniques. And as you can see on the chart, techniques that we are going to talk about are partitioning, abstraction, and projection. Let's see what these techniques are. Partitioning is the organization of knowledge into aggregation relationships where requirements knowledge is described in terms of its parts. Aggregation can be a thing or a concept or a term which can be described as that this part consists of several other parts. We can call it a whole part relationship. So we can organize a knowledge that we have acquired using the partitioning structuring technique. Let's consider the example of a booking system. A booking record may be defined as a flight reference, source and destination of flight, the name and address of the passenger, fare, and the date of travel. So a booking record has these as its parts, and these individual parts combine together to form what we call a booking record, or in computer terminology we call it whole part. So these individual parts combine together to form composite or a whole part abstraction. So we have to then understand our knowledge in terms of partitioning, and when we perform deeper analysis, this partitioning technique really helps us in developing a solution for the problem that we are discussing. The second knowledge structuring technique that you see listed on the chart is abstraction. Organization of knowledge according to general specific relationships is known as abstraction. Requirements of knowledge described by relating specific instances to abstract structures. Again, we can use the passenger abstraction to represent a class of passengers. A class of passenger can consist of children who don't pay full fares, adults, those who pay full fare, that is the published fare of the flight, and some passengers pay concessionary fares, and the abstraction passenger can represent all of these categories or classes of passengers. Let's consider the example of a computer. A computer can be an abstraction for a laptop. It can be an abstraction for a mainframe, for a mini computer, and it can be an abstraction for personal computers, desktops. I've mentioned a laptop already, and even our handheld computers can come under this abstraction. So an abstraction is a concept which is used by humans to deal with complexity in all walks of life. We take examples of biology or any other sciences. We see this concept of general specific relationship being captured in organization of knowledge. And I would say in biological sciences, this is a very important technique for organizing knowledge. The third technique that you see listed is projection. It means the organization of knowledge from different perspectives or from different viewpoints. Let's take the example of the booking system that I had mentioned before. We can view a booking system from an airline agent's perspective, from an airline management's perspective, from a travel agent's perspective, from a check-in desk operator's perspective. We can consider it from passengers' perspective, and we can also consider it from a bookings database perspective. So projection is something that one can organize knowledge from the viewpoints or perspectives of different stakeholders and different users. So today we have again discussed concepts that set the stage for requirements elicitation. We have talked about 4 dimensions of requirements elicitation. We have talked about requirements elicitation stages, that being objective setting. We have talked about background knowledge. We have talked about organizing knowledge, and we studied 3 very important and very useful knowledge organization techniques, that being partitioning, abstraction, and projection. And we have not talked about is requirements elicitation per se, that is, how do we actually collect information, that is the collection of explicit information. There are various techniques for this. For example, interviewing is one technique, building scenarios is another technique, Prototyping is another technique. Participant observation is also a technique for gathering stakeholders' requirements, and we will talk about these in our next lecture, which will be focused on gathering techniques and especially on interviewing. Till then, Khuda Hafiz, and see you in the next lecture. Thank you.